So, hey guys, yeah, thanks for joining me today on this really kind of comeback for More Than Indie. I have to say I've been quite out of it for some time, but I'm really excited that we can bring this back with a bit of a dynamic meeting. I usually have my meetings one-on-one, but I think it's really cool that with Yeti Pop Band I can have a bit of a bigger conversation. There's a lot of you in the band with a lot of really cool instruments. So I really would like to hear, a bit more about you guys. So maybe we can just start off with some introductions. Maybe Adrian, you can start because we kind of were just doing a bit of introductions about, Lebanon and you. So how did you guys meet? I assume you guys met in Lebanon.
Yeah,
I'd be interested to hear what he has to say.
okay. So yeah, I told you I'd sort of come and I had a job in this sort of small media agency. And at that time I'd been in the country for, I guess, a year, 2 years almost. And I was dabbling in music. I was going to jam sessions. Like I'd sort of always had an intention to be involved in music uh, in Lebanon. But just when I first moved there, I was getting set up. I was establishing myself. My brain was sort of elsewhere. And I guess a little bit before meeting Wael, like a few months before, I had a close friend of mine who's now actually in Berlin. He was a DJ. And he said he used to me and him used to talk a lot about music, and his DJ style was he was from Syria, and he made his living through DJing, like he got by DJing. And he had his kind of thing was that he was always his DJ sets kind of like encompassed a wide range of he was threading together, let's say, music that kind of spanned geographic space. So he would do a lot of Balkan music that would tie into Levantine music also, but then also push it towards even reggae and ska, like just whatever kind of he could sort of. But his set, I always loved his sets, and I felt that he'd really had a sense of what he was doing. And so we used to spend hours talking about music and genres and showing each other different styles. And there was a point where he had said to me he said, I wanted to ask you something about this particular artist. Like he wasn't a musician. Like he didn't know anything about the technicalities of music, but he had a really good ear. And it's kind of like a music anthropologist almost through by ear. Nice. And he asked me like, hey, I want to mix these two tracks. Like he was getting what he was already trying to harvest, like I say, a bass line from one track and then put a melody from another on top. And he was starting to do this kind of mixing. And he asked me at one point, like he wanted, I guess, a bit more freedom in what he was doing. And his barrier was the technical thing. So something came along. He was asking about a bass line, and I explained it to him. I think I don't know if there's an instrument nearby, or I was able to hum it to him. And I said, well, if you mix it this way and you change the key and you do that, and he kind of looked at me. He goes, okay, so you actually play? I was like, yeah, I played for most of my life. He goes, oh, so then he just sort of said, you need to do this. Like you should actually get active. Yeah. And so I went to visit my family like maybe a month after that, and I was like, okay, now I have to switch gears, and I brought my music gear back with me. And I brought my guitar and all this stuff. So, and then after that, I started going to jam sessions. And at that time, there were a few that were doing these. There was a lot of open jam sessions at the time.
And what year was that?
2014, late 2014. And so at that time, that was like peak Radio Beirut, peak all these, the Ram Cafe. There was all these it was still the indie period, where bands were sort of saying, perhaps it was starting to shift, but it was still the period where it was very much live music. And there was also just that kind of energy in the city at the time. Like you had that there were a lot of musicians coming over from Syria because of the situation, and they were really good. And they were very open to just meeting people and playing, because for them, they're also in a new place. They were obviously in a much different situation than I was, but they're bringing energy with them. That was very collaborative and very just open. They just want to play with people. And so I was actually, interestingly enough, some of the jam sessions I was going to, some of them were just total chaos and some of them were good. And I started actually meeting musicians, people who not immediately, but would eventually end up in Yeti Pop, like our drummer, for example. I met him through these jam sessions. He joined the band 5 years later, 6 years later even. But I actually met him there. And there was a lot of seeds planted that to this day, are relationships that I'm still, you know, that I still maintain, that still bear fruit in terms of collaboration on various levels, be it venue, musicians, whatever.
Yeah.
I was in this space where I had like something like idea, like I wanted to do something, I wanted to start a project, I wanted to start a band. I did have something with another guy that was not really going anywhere. It was a really cool idea, and he ended up leaving the country. And I was just sort of open. And then I went to, there was a barbecue at my work, like a late night barbecue on the balcony at this office. It was an apartment in Jamaica. And this guy turned up in a tuxedo.
I was in the
We were doing
tuxedo.
that.
That was me. That was me.
Yeah.
First of all, Adrian, I don't think I've ever heard all that story beforehand. I've known you now for over 10 years.
Session, like we learn things about ourselves.
Exactly. That's fun that I can still learn new
I love
things about
that.
you.
So
Yeah.
tuxedo man, yes.
Yeah, so I was in a suit because I was going to play a concert. So my whole thing is I actually moved to Lebanon 2009. I was actually trying to get away from music for many years because I went to music school, and
Okay.
music school kind of pounds music out of you sometimes because, yeah, rigidness. And yeah, but I was studying music, but with music technology, so I was trying to work more in production. And when I got to Lebanon, I actually worked first in Studio Vision, like MTV.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah. But man, the hours were terrible. And then at some point, word of mouth came, and somebody knew that I played French horn. And it got back to the head of the National Orchestra in Lebanon. And they're, oh, let him come in audition. And I went and auditioned. What they didn't know is I hadn't played for 4 years. At that point, I told them it'd only been a few months, so like I practiced for 2 weeks, like crazy, yeah. And somehow I got in, and yeah. So fast forward, I was going to play one of the concerts because we used to have concerts every Friday, and but I was stopping by this barbecue with another friend of mine who was, I guess, I don't know, Adrian, who David had met in your company.
Yeah, there was, well, I mean, he had somehow met one of the, I think the
Yeah.
HR, and they were
And
looking to fill the position.
yeah,
Yeah, he was.
basically, yeah. And so he's like, oh, I'm gonna go to this barbecue. And I'm like, oh, I'll stop by with you before, the concert. So I literally was wearing my tux. I had my horn on my back, and like it was hilarious because I could see it happening when we were in there because Adrian's the tallest person in the room. Duro me train, like so. And then I see him looking at me, and I'm like, oh, this guy's gonna come up to me, and he like runs over. He's like, hey, are you a musician? And then I was like, yeah. And then we started talking. And literally we realized our tastes in music didn't necessarily align, but everything we thought about, like what we want in a band, was completely aligned. And
Such as what? Like, how would we describe Yeti Pop, right? Like, what do you want? What did you guys want in a band? Because I think it's
honestly,
very.
if you describe Yeti Pop, it's what we were talking about. So, really quick, Jad finally answered. I don't know if
Okay,
but I don't know if he's gonna hop on this call or not.
that'd be nice.
I can't join. Oh, he said he can't join.
Please
Never
go
mind.
ahead with that.
Let's go ahead with that.
There's a person named Jad. He's longtime member of the band, loyal friend. Key.
Yes, Jad introduced us to each other. Jad introduced me to Yeti Pop. He's like, hi, I'm in a band. You should check us out. And I'm like, yes, do that.
Jad is probably our best hype man. So
yeah, he's our best hype. He has the card ready to go.
That's really cool.
I don't. I'm terrible at it. So very needed. Anyway, so Wael.
yeah, so Yeti Pop. If you read the description of the band,
which I did, and that's why I'm like, I think my eyes are like, tell me more. What does it mean?
Well, that's exactly like, I'm not kidding. That's exactly what we were talking about when we were sitting and talking about, like, we want to hear this like big cacophony of sound and this like thundering drums and these things, and want it to be like orchestral but not an orchestra, and like all these things, and like honestly, I think even some of the things we were talking about when we were talking about it, we were realizing that that's what we wanted, like, which was very interesting. Because like, as a musician, you meet a lot of musicians, and a lot of times like everyone's enthusiastic, and then but sometimes you're really like, I don't know if this is gonna work, and then you are enthusiastic, you go into it, and so you kind of learn. Like when we were talking, I was like, oh, this is like, yeah. But the funny thing is, um, after that initial meeting, we actually didn't meet each other for like another few weeks after
Yeah.
like.
So actually, like, just to go back one step, and I'll get to that point. Yeah, I think some of the things we were talking about in terms of like what we wanted to hear is like, wow, like it's funny too, like hindsight. At the time, we didn't even think about like we like in terms of the instruments, that was something that developed later. But there was this idea of like we agree. I think one of the most fundamental things we agreed on was like the song should be strong, like it should be songs over everything else. You know,
Yeah.
I think we both agreed that we wanted to see a band that would be fun live.
Yeah.
I felt that a lot of like one of my favorite things in music is just high energy live shows.
Okay.
And that's how I like to experience music. That's my favorite thing about it. And so even though we were talking from two very different, like we compare, it's weird. The tastes are not actually different, but they were on the surface, meaning that Wael like was mentioning a lot of like indie folk artists, for example, that he was into. And we didn't always specify, but like my general attitude at the time was, ooh, like old school folk music. I love sea shanties and I love folk music from different parts of the world. And I love like really sort of organic raw stuff. And so like once we got further into it, I realized, oh, he likes the Decemberists, like, you know, Tom Waits,
Yes. No.
you know, bands like Beirut, which actually to me might have fit to some degree that trend, but they were as artists incredible and they really had a lot of substance to what they're doing. And I love storytelling. So, and the intensity in that kind of music for me appealed to the other kinds of music I like, which is like, you know, hardcore and like metal and like all
Which
this
is
stuff.
what
And for
scared me
there's
about Adrian
there
too. I
between
had the
those
same
genres.
kind of feeling because he was talking about hardcore and metal, and I'm just like, not my vibe. But then the things he was talking about it were all the theatrical aspects of it,
Which
and
is
that's
what
like
you also are into,
that's my
right?
jam. That's like,
Yeah.
and like when we talk about theatrical, musical theater is my thing. I love it. Like I love raw, dramatic, theatrical, like go over the top, and
It
like that's
shows. I mean, it shows in the videos. Because that
yeah,
was the first thing Jad was like, put on
yeah,
YouTube. And I'm like, what? Okay, this is interesting. Like,
yeah,
I can't tell what I'm listening to.
yeah.
Um, and I was very intrigued. And I'm like, this is, okay, yeah, let's do this.
Well,
And
that's the point. It's like, and I'm glad that it, like honestly, again, retrospectively looking back at it, we were talking about how much we just wanted to have fun, and everyone who was going to watch us would have fun.
Yeah.
It's like that's the biggest thing. And then honestly, I really didn't think about it, but always we say it like Adrian said it, like the song is the most important thing. We always say when we're writing a song, the song is king.
Mm.
Like not dasata, it's like that's it.
Yeah, yeah,
It's so even when we're writing, we sit and like maybe we really like a part, or one of us is singing but the other one isn't, or this or that, and we're just like, doesn't matter, get your egos out of the way, get, even if you like this part, get out of the way. Does it serve the song? Does it make
yeah.
it better? Like that's what we have to think about, and that's up until now, that's exactly what we still do.
Yeah,
And
and
I
there's an
think
emphasis on simplicity, but ironically, a lot of people that watch us go like, you guys are kind of proggy, and like prog is like the furthest thing from our minds, you know? And it's like we don't think of prog at all. Like all of our melodies are very simple. We harmonize, you know, we have vocal harmony, we have trumpet and violins harmonizing together. So in that sense, there's some orchestration. But the baseline
that's
melody,
it. It's I think the progression in orchestral music, that is also like, I love progressive rock as well. And it's, even when I was able to like take in more, I'm like, oh, progressive metal, that's great. Like, so I went to a Soen concert in Amsterdam, and I'm like, this is glorious, this is everything. So also, I mean, even for me, when you asked me earlier when we were doing this introduction, like what do you listen to? And I think you guys talking more and more about bands, you mentioned the Decemberists, and I'm like, oh my god, I love the Decemberists, yes. And Death Cab for Cutie, and I saw Beirut when they performed in Lebanon, and it was great. And that all this like Baroque pop, um, and yeah, I think it's very much about the experience, the storytelling in a song. For instance, one thing I love about Death Cab for Cutie as a band, and that always strikes me, and I talk about them a lot. And when we're talking about indie and like old school indie, is how much they love to write like absurd lyrics about life, and they're like extremely simple but also so profound. And yeah, so I think for you guys, you know, what you mentioned, musical theatricals, and you know that big thing and the storytelling. And so I've also I paid attention to the lyrics in your song, and it's like there's a lot of storytelling. Like this guy came in, and you know this girl did this. So, what would you like? Would you say? So when you say it's more about the song, are there themes that you like talking about, or how do you come up with your composition?
I would say that all of our songs are making a comment of some sort, and usually a comment on society. We don't say we're political, we don't say we're like these kinds of things, but it's commenting on some sort of thing. And maybe you don't notice it, but for us, we say, oh, we already commented on this, so we're gonna do that. So when we're writing a new song, we're like, oh, we already talked about that, even though in that song you might not know it. But when we're writing, like a lot of times, Adrian will tell you I do this like every time where we're doing it, and I'm like sitting there confused. I'm like, Adrian, just tell me what we're trying to say. Tell me what it is that we're trying to say. And then when we sit and discuss what it is, then it kind of like starts clicking. And the song might even sound like that's what it's about, but as long as we know, yeah. So even though it's a story, sometimes that story is a metaphor to something else.
What is Appletown?
What is Appleton?
It's a wild classic.
Appleton is probably one of the more difficult ones, even because it's like,
you were like, I of course I'm gonna ask you about that. Like, I think people who know me would be like, of course she's gonna ask the difficult questions.
So Appletown,
like,
go ahead. No, please go ahead, Adrian. I love when you describe it.
Well, I was going to say it's probably a bit unique in the catalog because it predates the band.
Yeah, because it was one of the first songs that I wrote. And when I showed it to Adrian, he's like, oh, this is awesome. And then like, if you would have heard it before, there's parts of it that are exactly the same as I had written it, and then things that completely changed. But if I could say anything, it's kind of about the duality of people and how they interact with, you know, with society, how everything is not the way it seems. But we act accordingly to what everyone thinks it is. Does that make sense? I don't know.
Trying to, it's sinking in.
I don't know if Adrian, what I don't know, what do you feel? Because like it does predate, but what did you feel?
I mean, basically, in some ways, it's an extreme example of the Yeti kind of writing style, which is that it's so happy dappy, like, you know, like the melody, like the way it starts, right? I'm talking about the first section of the song as well in the ukulele. That's how the original sounded the whole way through, just with more verses. So Wael had this very simple song with a sort of a multitude of verses and then a turnaround where he would say Appletown. And then you just go back and it had like, I don't know, like 6-7 verses, right? And that was the song. And it was a ukulele song. Like it was something he could do entirely on his own. And then the instrumentation and the band and all the melodies and all that was added as a Yeti. That was the Yeti edition, basically. That kind of, you hear there, if you isolate that first section of the song, it's basically this song that from a distance sounds like a lullaby or almost a kid's song. But then the lyrics are going, whoa, it's very dystopian. And that's like, in a way, like the blueprint of the band, you know? It's like melodic, catchy, instantly enjoyable songs that are actually sort of from afar sound that way, but when you get closer, something's not right, you know? And I guess then we got or we got more literal with it by then having like adding this like heavy part where, you know, the song starts in a major key, then we come in with a big crashing minor chord and it goes all dark and kind of rocky, like then a violin comes in, then there's like a ridiculous guitar solo, and then it cuts back. It's like, which by the way, in the video was like, I remember talking with a friend of mine who's a Lebanese filmmaker, and he's a very like indie underground filmmaker. Like he's all about like the really conceptual films, very off center. And I was like, dude, like what do we do about the guitar solo? And he's like, you lean into it. Just like in the video, he's like, it's like you need to be posturing on the top of the, you know, tractor, I guess, as it was.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
so
With your like
that
formal wear, suddenly you're like, I'm, you know, like,
yeah,
and it's like really nice shirt, but like suddenly you look so formal and serious, and your hair's all like
yeah,
into
exactly.
it.
Exactly.
But,
So I think
but
that was just sort of like the yin and yang of like taking the Yeti thing and making it as making it as literal as it can possibly be. Like I guess that's what Appletown is in terms of like the vibe, you know. Other songs will have the same elements, but they're more interwoven. Like it's not as A B. Whereas
Okay.
yeah, Appletown is like A happy part, B chaos, A happy, you know, back to A, chaos out. Whereas other songs will be more layered on top of each other, you know, like
yeah,
you'll have those. So yeah.
that was a great explanation.
Do you have anything to add to that one, or we could also like move into discussing a bit more about other members of the band, like the sounds, how do you operate?
Those are a bunch of questions. Which one do you want us to go to first?
What do you feel like? What is your intuition telling you? No, I think, yeah, I don't know. It's you guys. It's up to you guys.
I mean, the story about like how we were not planning on being a 7-member band.
Yes.
That was not the plan. And all these instruments, it was never the plan. Like the only, that's what I was kind of saying before, is the blueprint, if there was like the blueprint in my mind, and I kind of speaking for myself, was based on what Wael and I discussed in terms of like the components, not physical components, but like what do you want to see in a band conceptually, the conceptual components, energy, good songs, a bit of a unique sound, if possible. And what I imagined at the time was totally different than what it became. Like what I had in my head is what it would be is generally quite different. And so I guess while like I mean, so it was you and me writing songs on the acoustic guitar for, you know, the better part of a year, and just doing it the two of us with the intention of doing something, but kind of moving very slowly and also organically.
Yeah.
And finding our meeting point musically. And then it was, I guess Rami was the first. Like
Rami was the first, I think.
Recording. So do you remember how that came about?
We just, but just to let you know, we when we would talk to people about it, and they'd be like, either somebody would be like, oh, can I come and play with you? Or, you know, we would just think, we wouldn't say no to anything. Like we never like Nami played banjo, and we never we're like, banjo, that doesn't fit into what we were talking about. We're like, yeah, come on. Then I ended up one Halloween meeting Virginia, who plays violin, and she just moved to Beirut, and she was just trying to find people to like jam with. I'm like, just come and play with us for a bit, let's see. And then she ended up joining the band. And then Dolly, I had known her from before, and I don't know, all this stuff, like we just, and just like, yeah, come play. And then people left, people came in. But again, the music never changed. Sorry, go ahead, Adrian.
I was going to say, well, what happened with each person, right, is that they brought elements that we were trying, and some stuck and others did. So Rami came with a banjo, and what's interesting about that is that Rami wasn't really good at holding the patterns, the banjo patterns, like consistently. He was still kind of learning. It was a hobby of his. But he would play the banjo in an unconventional way, and it would almost sound to me classical, and it sort of boosted that. So that was there at the beginning, and then Virginia brought the violin. Violin just fit really well. It helped me, especially coming from like more of like a rock background, to like reimagine where the melody in the song sits and how you can orchestrate the song. Like usually rock music, guitar takes the lead, right? It's playing chords, the vocal, you know, the guitar is the top instrument, and this allowed the guitar to be the hugging instrument, the bass instrument, and then letting all these others take the lead melodically, right? Which helped really broaden out the possibilities of the sound. That, oh, well, we can give the violin a melody. That's more interesting, and also it take things in different directions. And then Dolly came in, and Dolly was a sort of like really talented sort of person who sings and plays guitar, who's very like quirky and sort of natural at what she does, and with an amazing ear for harmony. So Wael and I were already really vocal harmonies, and Wael's like, well, because he played French horn, which is a harmony instrument, he just has an ear for harmonies. And Wael and I's voices mix really well. Like mine's kind of like soft and round and a bit lower, and his is like sort of high and piercing, and it's a great lead voice. And so all of a sudden you have violin harmonizing with trumpet, or vice versa. You have multiple vocal harmony, guitar, and and at that time no rhythm section and banjo, and it was this weird like kind of mini orchestra, and that's we played our first show. And then after and so that introduced elements. And eventually, banjo just never continued. Like hard to find banjo players. Rami couldn't swing it, like he wasn't available. And we kept gelling the sound. And although members left, like Virginia and Dolly moved abroad, it was sort of like we tried to retain the elements that we felt were unique and really helped push this style along. So violin, we did everything in our power to keep it, which we do.
We also realized too, like that we were maybe pushing it a little bit too far sometimes, and we're like, oh, let's bring it back because it sounds better. Maybe if we don't, it could sound messy if we did this and that. And we're just like, it sounds tighter like this. And when we needed it, we add back the choir feel. Like, yeah.
In the beginning, we were, I'd say we were generally pretty good from the top about, that just speaks to experience. Like we all play different bands, and, all of us had most of us had some kind of musical either experience in different settings, like orchestra. We all played in bands. We played in different types of bands. So there was an awareness about not making it too too messy or adding too many layers at once. But certainly there's still that process. Like we were putting like 3-part harmony across the entire thing. Realize maybe that's for the climax, the crescendo, or for certain songs. And you go through, and as members left, it was also an opportunity to refocus. And then go, okay, this works fine, but maybe here we could still use that. So, then we went looking for others to fill those voids, you know what I mean? Which is how we got.
Do you see Yeti Pop Band as the space where, it's as if you guys created this environment and a vision? And, I think the fact that you're very open from the start, you were very open, like, yeah, sure, banjo, why not? Just come right in. And so do you think that helps you as well? I don't know, be the type of people who've just created this space that's more of like, it's a community somehow, maybe a bit of a really teeny tiny micro community of people who could come in and out. And I think also with the fact that people travel so much these days, like it's very easy to relocate for work or for personal reasons, and so I can imagine that's quite difficult to work with as a band. So would you say would you say that yes, we do want to keep this open, or is it like if that doesn't happen, something dies out? Like,
well, when it comes to like people, like you're saying, sometimes it happens where somebody moves, something happens, somebody cannot come and play a show, these kinds of things, where everyone who is in Yeti Pop will always be a Yeti. There's always once a Yeti, always a Yeti. But if you can't, again, the show must go on. Again, talking about theatrical things, the show must go on. So we will find a way to put that show on, whether it's finding another person who then becomes a Yeti, or finding an old Yeti to play the show with us, and things like this. So this will never change, that openness. It is that community of Yetis that and again, where we say the song is king, the band is king. We have to just make sure that the show must go on. Musically, I think we're still like that. Maybe we're a little bit more rigid now because we know exactly what we want, but we still, I think, always say, let's try it. We this is different than what we do. Let's try it. Let's see. And there's never a closed off like, no, this is just not going to work. We're not going to do this. No, let's try it. If it works, it works. Great. So there is that
mindset, maybe.
That mindset.
This idea that someday we would love to see all of our songs turned into like a musical theater performance. It's like a play,
yes.
Because we think they lend themselves to that. So it's sort of like you create this, I think what you said is awesome. Like you create a space where it's a family, it's a social vibe that people are involved in because they've connected through personalities and music. And I definitely think that there's always been this good vibe with everyone who's come through. Just sort of like there's a sense of like there's a homeliness to everyone that's like homeliness. They're homies as well. But then I think also the music, this type of music that it is, lends itself to that, where
I think so too. I think that was also one of the things that, I mean, just sensed it from, well, because the first time I consumed your music was in video, right? It was a video, so I was able to really kind of get the full experience, and get the impression of kind of like, okay, huh, interesting, the props, the there's a lot of performative acts, which is very clear. And I think that essence of it, because I mean, I've been in theater settings in my life, like really on a really small scale. Like I've done improv, but I do remember, in elementary school we had theater classes, and the culture of theater is very, it's a very closed, tight-knit group where there's naturally a lot of trust. There has to be trust, right? Because you have to innately trust each other to do things together. And so I think that I just sense that in the way that you work together, like that dynamic. But also, indeed, like if I think back to music wise, bands that are like where there's a lot of members of the band, there has to be, I mean, of course there's going to be differences, and of course it's not always going to work out, but there's a lot of, I think that the common denominator is always the fun and the play factor. Yeah, so yeah, it's just really nice to hear you guys talk about that as well.
I think the more that we focused our sound, like once we finally got our recordings done and we sort of got through that in those initial stages of really figuring out what the final like kind of vision would be, like not final, but that kind of like coming, that kind of more developed vision, it becomes easier to integrate people because you're communicating to potential people what this is. All they have to do is listen to it, and they can relate to it in their own way. When we played in Portugal last year, Shard al-Hajar in Lebanon wasn't able to make it. And so we had a woman named Mikash play bass for us, a Portuguese bass player. And she's from like the hardcore scene, and she's amazing, like super amazing bass player. And she just brought her own vibe to it. And she was like ripping up around the stage. Like we were playing in this like old cathedral in Lisbon. We'd done this like cine concert thing. And and she at one point, like she asked me before the show, because it was like we'd done like a kind of like dance-based show the night before, like 2 nights before, in a kind of cultural space where people were dancing. It was like kind of typical club. And so it was very interactive. And so the rocky, like kind of rocking out vibe fit well there, because everyone's moving and dancing. It's high energy. This one, people were seated, and we were in an old like courtyard of this I don't know, 600 500-year-old cathedral, and the sound was amazing. And then Mikash comes up to me before the show. She's like, so what's the approach? And she's like, do I fuck it up? And I just look at her, I'm like, yeah, you fuck it up. She's like, and so when we got to like the climax, the more high energy songs towards the end of the set, she was like jumping all off the PA,
like doing splits in the air and stuff.
But it worked. Like people were loving it. You know what I mean? Like it was just like, and you'd sort of have me and Mikash, like we were on opposite ends of the stage. And we're the two sort of like, and our drummer, also Kevin Safadi, our drummer in Lebanon, wasn't able to make it. So Rudy Bajani, who's from the Lebanese metal band Fenemy, who lives in Portugal, he was playing with us. So you sort of had this back line, which were all like rock guys, that we were sort of like rocking out. And then you had the forward line, which was like Wael and Rudy, who were like violin, trumpets. And so it was this funny thing where it's like Mikash on one side and me on the other. And you sort of see this thing when the hits would come, like the big chords. You'd see Mikash sort of like hit the ground, like Well, just sitting there like posturing, like with his trumpet, So it works really. It takes on a sort of its own, you know what I mean? That's cohesive, and it's still cohesive because those elements are in the music, right? So it makes sense. It's not someone flailing their bass about just because they're trying to put something in the. It's not, right?
So, yeah. In terms of, I'm just kind of like really reflecting on the part where, how you guys started, but also then the way that the discovery part, right? It sounds like there was a huge discovery phase of like, how do we make this happen, right? Like everybody starts with this vision of like, great, like what are the steps? What are the sounds? How do we craft this? And then, because for me, I'm always, because I work in marketing and stuff, here's the marketing that I told you is going to come back somehow. I mean, I've been a project manager, in a different role. And I think in marketing, there's always this like, what is, like, what is the brand? What are we trying to say? Who is our audience? Da, da, da. So it's this very like, there's a framework essentially. And so I think for me also then as an artist, there's the part where like art is all about this very fluid exploration, right? Like, let's just see what comes out. What am I expressing? How would you guys, how would you comment on the part where you're putting work out? There's also this like discovery phase where you're still maybe, performing or jamming together. So like putting something out there, it's not you're just sitting behind closed doors. And it's the whole process being what got you to hone in your sound. And that's, I think, the whole 10,000 hours of work gets you to like craft your, perfect your craft, or etc., etc. How did you experience all of this? Were there struggles? Was it easy? Was it like, oh my god, we're shit? I think let's talk a bit about that.
I mean, I'm just gonna use some of the words you said, some of the struggles. You said 10,000 hours of work. I feel like we've had 100,000 hours of work and still it's not complete. And I think we always kind of feel like that, which I think is a normal thing for any artist to feel. But I feel like, yeah, we do it a lot. Me and Adrian, we go back and be like, oh, we could have done that better. We could have done this. And then, so I think that's one of our struggles that we always, because we're so like, and like the thing is, me and Adrian have other music projects. We do this. We don't do it with other music projects the way we do with Yeti Pop. Like we have this like higher perfectionism, I think, towards that. And I think that's our biggest struggle when, even it's been like, 7 years we finished a song, we're like, could we have done it differently here? Like, I don't know, Adrian, you agree with that or not, but I think
Oh yeah, 100%. Like yeah, and yeah. But I think we worked on that a lot, you know what I mean? Like, there's no question that in the beginning, like it was too much, But I will say, like like you were asking about like you're putting stuff out there as you develop. So, we played a lot. We were gigging for quite a bit before we released our first EP. We played a lot of shows, including some sizable ones. Like we played, places like Station Beirut where we had 250 people come out, which is a lot for Beirut, like that's a lot for a band without material that had been without any material released. And we got to play Metro Medina, like the old Metro. We got to play like some of the premier venues in Beirut, and we got some pretty cool live experiences. And what was interesting is like I guess that there was sort of two aspects. We played our first show basically acoustically, right? And then at some point there was an intentional push, especially from my side, to electrify the sound, because that was kind of something I always wanted from the beginning. But it was also a bit of a struggle because people kind of, not a struggle, but integrating that is hard because it's noisy, it's loud, it's messy. You have to hone in your rhythm section. You're adding an entire band to an existing project.
Especially with all the harmonies and stuff, trying to add that in, trying to make it all cohesive.
And the sound didn't really exist anywhere. Like no one was quite doing what we're doing with like not vocal harmony in that way, not trumpet and violin in that way. You know what I mean? If I say so. Like, I mean, there are plenty of rock adjacent bands that have orchestra or have harmony, but it's not in the way that I felt we were doing it, right? So there was this kind of thing of like, you need to hear all these be able to hear all these melodic instruments while there's a drums and electric guitar ripping behind you.
Yeah.
And that was a growing pain, and we, in-ear monitors help with that. Although we managed to pull it off with normal monitors. But that wasn't always easy too, because you go through phases. But I will say that by and large, with the exception of maybe one show in my mind, I think that we sort of always managed to pull it off live. Like even if looking back at it, like, oh my God, we're so out of tune. If you hear the recordings now, most of the feedback from those shows is people had a great time. And I guess that would just speak to the like keeping focus on the core of what you're doing. And I think that was cool. Like our first gig was amazing. I think, not our first gig, the backdoor gig, like the one that was packed. We played first proper gig. And I mean, if you listen to it now, we were like, the vocal harmonies are all out of tune. We can barely hear ourselves. There, it was, if we heard it now, we'd, probably cringe, but it went, like
amazing.
was amazingly, and people had a great time. People were wanted. We played a bunch of songs twice because we didn't have enough material, and people were demanding more, you know. But I guess maybe what it was, at least speaking for myself, was like, you know, there's a sound you're trying to get to. You can't say exactly what it is, but you know it's not there yet. So even if shit's difficult, you know this is not we're not there. We have to keep pushing. Like it was, okay, it's not sounding it. Well, this is not what it's meant to be. You know what I mean? And the studio helped with that, like being in a space where you can control all the sounds and figure out where they fit together. And then oh, a member is not available for this gig, and you play the gig, and you realize, okay, well, that created a lot of space sonically. So maybe next time around, the instrument plays here and here, and they don't have to be present. You know, maybe we need to be more judicious with when each of us are playing, and like, oh, that's how that works sonically. Okay, so if the guitar doesn't play here, that means these guys can hear themselves more, but it doesn't take from the energy. It just creates more dynamics. So when the guitar comes back in, bang, you know, everyone's right there.
Yeah, I think it has to. I mean, you perfectly described what you know, all these coaches in today's world, right? Like there's a lot of coaches and psychologists talking about like how can you be the best version of yourself and all of that. And I'm like, I think about that a lot as well. And you sort of perfectly described, you know, how do you do it despite it not working? So how do you like still do things despite it not being what you want it to be, despite it being discouraging potentially at times, like, okay, that was not great, like, oh, we suck, we should not do this at all. It's like, no, you continued to do stuff. That's one takeaway, I would say. Another one would be the fact that that there's not this like rigidity of, oh, we need to have a full EP before we perform multiple shows, or like big shows, or things like I don't know, like we need to have these band members to be able to also perform because like we've presented ourselves this way. And so what will people think if, you know, if we're a 5-people band and then there's just 3 of us on stage? Like, oh, that must make us look bad. So I just kind of like, I'm pulling all of that out from hearing you talk about it. And I think it's what really differentiates people who, I mean, I don't want to say like people who succeed or make it, but it's also that you still enjoy what you do. And I think that's also what matters.
That's a really good way of putting it.
It's performance, right? Like that's absolutely. But it's also performance. I mean, if you're bringing the energy, that's the art of performance, right? And the art of art, it's the art of it. Like you're conveying your personality and you're conveying your vibe through music. So if that's present, you know, you can get away with a lot.
I think that's the essence of it, right? Instead of it being this, I don't know, process of having to follow things by the book, or putting putting too many rules for yourselves, and then not being able to like commit to them. So also, I mean, while I'm thinking a bit about the perfectionism, so it's like hyper perfectionism specific to Yeti Pop, but perhaps the fact that you are not so hyper perfectionist, or maybe things just flow smoother in other projects that you guys have. I see it as if you can see that other side of you. Like you can see that, hey, I'm able not to be this person. So like, how do I lean a bit more into that, even with having a certain vision or standards for this specific project.
But that's the thing. So that was in Yeti Pop a learning process, and I think that's what also helped with the other projects, because we learned to know all the rules and throw them out the window, and I think that's what we now do in Yeti Pop and other projects. But it took a while. It took and that was, like you're saying, you pinpointed it. That was a huge struggle. But yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah.
I mean, I was going to say too, like, I'm the one who's particularly guilty of the perfectionism. And,
how do you work through that? How do you feel?
I think for you it was more difficult too, because I did go to, I'm classically trained and I went to music school, and it's all about perfection. And a big thing of me why I wanted to get out of that whole world, or like remove myself, is because I hated the fact that everything was so rigid, because you try so hard and then at the end you're just like, I'm tired and I don't like this anymore, and it just makes the whole process more difficult. And maybe I think that's why. But I wouldn't say that I wasn't like that, but I think just in comparison, you were you were a little bit more, Adrian.
And to Wael's point, so like even now, so one of my other projects is like this hardcore band that's like very stripped down. It has like 1 minute songs, and it's been funny because I've been able to bring the songwriting, playing in a band lessons that I've developed over years with Yeti Pop that have really I feel from my side help the band gel. But the lesson I'm getting from the band is that the entire psychology is stripped down, and if I come in with an idea, it's got 2 verses and 2 choruses. The singer goes, "Can we just hack off the last 2 and make the song 45 seconds instead of a minute and a half?" I'm like, okay. And then you play it and you're like, that makes sense. You know what I mean? And so it's been, and also letting having a very hands-off approach to just everything. It's just because that type of music, it's just pure energy. That's that's what it thrives on. So if you do anything to remotely taint the energy, like the actual grit and drive, then it no longer is working, So it was this lesson of if you allow your brain to go into that perfectionist zone, you're gonna just screw the entire project. So what's it's helped me take to breathe a bit when it comes to Yeti, because I'm realizing, okay, that's a great creative lesson. So now on a lot of things, there's a lot of things that we would trip up over that I'm starting to at least, maybe it's making just the steps a bit easier when it comes to Yeti, because it's another perspective, in the same way that Wael was reacting against the orchestra. In a way, I was okay, let this project sort of be a lesson about how you can chill. So helping, I think it's helping me a lot when managing with Yeti, to be honest.
All right. So just final words, guys. Do you have upcoming shows or releases that you want to kind of tell the world about, just to kind of save the date? Remember to, maybe not a very rigid date. What's in the future?
We are finishing up a new EP. Cannot tell you the date yet because we're still working on it. Any solid shows? I would say the most, maybe one that is probably will happen, is one in September, but in Lisbon, at one of the venues we played at last year. It's called Bota. Yeah. Cool. If anybody's in Lisbon, look it up.
Around that right now, just going through booking. Yeah. So September, Europe, September is sort of a goal. Most likely Iberia. I'm saying Europe, but it's probably, unless anyone has any hookups in other cities in the continent.
Nice. No, that's very exciting, and I really enjoyed hearing about Yeti Pop, and definitely would recommend listening to. Well, Apple Town was very interesting, but you guys have a lot of cool music. And so I think maybe after the EP's out, we could kind of tune back in and have a full laptop. I think I'd really like that.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah.
Cool.
Thank
Good luck
you,
with your meeting, Adrian, and say hi to Jad for me.
Yep.
All right, guys. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.